Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. It's a nightmare situation. You've just been in an auto accident and find that access to critical rehabilitative care, such as physiotherapy, chiropractic, or massage therapy, hangs precariously on meeting the auto insurance industry's predefined set of criteria. If your injuries or circumstances don't exactly fit, then you may not receive the care you need. In the province of Ontario, this nightmare happens all too often as accident victims and healthcare providers struggle to conform to a system stacked in favor of the auto insurance industry. Joining us today to talk about this struggle is Leslie Tempest, a registered physiotherapist with a Bachelor of Science in Physical Therapy and owner of ProActive Rehab, the longest-running private independent full-service physical rehabilitation clinic in Huntsville, Ontario. Leslie, thanks for joining us today on RegWatch.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
So Leslie, for the past few months, we've been covering issues around Ontario's auto insurance system from the perspective of health service providers who provide rehabilitation treatment to victims of auto accidents, which of course you are one of. Let's start off with a little background. How long have you been a physiotherapist?
I graduated from my training in 1992, so that gets me at 31 years now.
And what types of treatment are offered at your clinic, ProActive Rehab?
Well, like you indicated, that we are a full-service rehabilitation center, and so we have a combination of physiotherapy, massage therapy, athletic therapy also, and then a couple of sidearms, exercise-focused therapy, and a fairly unique program, at least in my area, which is an aquatic therapy program.
Leslie, what portion of your business is treating auto accident victims?
I would say it varies between 15 and 20% per year.
Is that a big portion?
It's a reasonable portion. I mean, it certainly takes up a big portion of our time and our efforts and energies. From a revenue perspective, it sits about that percentage, and then we balance that off with WSIB is another 20%, and then our private paying population is about 60%.
So the revenue is around 15, 20%, but you're saying the time commitment to service those patients is higher?
Yes, I would say it is. Yeah, it's probably one of the more administratively heavy sort of providers or sort of avenues of care that we give. Yeah.
How important is physiotherapy and other rehab treatments for accident victims in their recovery?
Oh, I'd say it's crucial. I mean, the vast majority of people who have physical injury from car accidents need some sort of physical therapy type intervention to help them get back to their kind of pre-accident state, or as close to that as we can help them get.
So how challenging is that journey to recovery?
Oh, that varies significantly. There's certainly some people that injuries are what we would call relatively minor. They recover quite quickly. They follow a very nice and predicted path of kind of course of care and recovery time, and make a very good recovery. And then you have the far other extent end of that extreme, where you've got significant, complex, multiple injuries, highly involved, that can be years. Sometimes people are never really fully recover.
Is the timing of treatment important, meaning how soon they can get into treatment?
Yeah, sure. Very much so. Just like any injury, the sooner you kind of get on top of it and start to get some help and some guidance and some care and some education around what's going on, how to best manage it for the stage that it's at, and to help carry it through the process of recovery, the more likely you are to have that better outcome. The longer people have to deal with these issues without that kind of care or guidance or education, the more set they become, the harder it is to kind of reverse any subsequent changes that take place.
So in your experience, is the auto insurance claim system, fluid enough to support that quick treatment?
Well, in some cases or in some ways, I would say it is, in that since they have developed this Minor Injury Guideline, that one of the purposes behind that was to try to facilitate faster access to care, so that people can be seen more quickly, to sort of less sort of administrative hurdles to get somebody into care. So from that perspective, the minor injury guideline has kind of helped to accelerate or sort of the initial access. The challenge that I think we do run up against, though, is that not all providers provide care within the auto accident sector. And so then you're needing to find a provider that does, and then you have wait lists to contend with, because in most cases there's not enough providers to meet the demand coming in.
Leslie, we should quickly mention that in Ontario, there are over 20,000 health service providers who treat victims of auto accidents. And that puts you and your colleagues under the regulatory control of the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, or FSRA, which became active in 2019 when it took over for the now defunct Financial Services Commission of Ontario. In your opinion, is FSRA serving the needs of auto accident victims?
Well, I would say that they're more regulating the access, I guess, to the service. And it's more because their intention is to minimize insurance fraud. That's why they're there. They're not really regulating what we do here in the clinic. There's no management over us as regulated healthcare professionals and what we do and what we put on treatment plans or any of that kind of thing. But they're overseeing the bigger picture more from a insurance fraud on behalf of providers and on behalf of claimants. So we have to go through an annual renewal process with that regulator to be a regulated provider. And the main stuff that they're interested in is, are you following the rules to make sure that you're not doing fraud yourself and you're not dealing with a fraudulent claimant.
So the minor injury guideline, its real purpose is to contain costs, right?
Yeah.
And
but I think, I don't know whether that comes from the financial services regulator or from sort of the insurance industry itself and with the HCI system. Because you're right, it is trying to contain costs. It only releases money to a certain extent sort of quickly. And then if you need to access more funds from the insurance policy beyond that, then you have to start to go through more of the process and sort of jumping through further hoops that the industry kind of has put there. But the intention behind the minor injury guideline in the first place was to give you, quote, immediate access to up to $3,500 to provide care.
Lastly, the cap on funding is outlined by the Ontario provincial government in the minor injury guideline. The MIG sets the cap at $3,500, which, as viewers can see in this table, is the lowest in the country. In fact, $2,000 lower than Alberta, which is also a private system, as most of the others. Is $3,500 enough coverage, Leslie?
In the minor injury guideline, it's all about the dollars and cents. So there's only $3,500 to deal with, right? So you can give as much treatment as you feel you can for that amount of money. You can't say that I think I need to treat them more times, which actually adds up to more money. Most people, we need to access the full $3,500, and many we go requesting beyond that. So probably it's a small number that it does, that they're within the MIG, they're looked after, and they're done within that time frame and monetary structure. But this is kind of what I've liked to sometimes say, that they've built this very specific and structured round hole, as I would say. And then if you get a client who is a round peg, fits in very nicely and everything works out great. But most people are not. Many of them are not round pegs. And when you're trying to put a round peg or a not round peg into a round hole, it just doesn't work. And so that's when we end up having to, kind of try and take it further and ask for more money and, sort of try to get support to keep on working with these folks.
The square peg and round hole dilemma.
Yes, exactly.
So how much of a fight is that then? And who are you fighting with? Are you battling against the insurance company? Is that where the fight is?
Yeah, I would say usually if it turns into a fight, I mean, it's certainly where we have to request funding from. So it's form completion. We need to fill in various forms along the way to request further treatment and funding for further treatment. So that's always the first step. And if that gets approved, then everybody's happy and we carry on with another block of money and time. If it doesn't get approved, then sometimes we're nearly at the end of what we can do. If it doesn't get approved, we can call and sometimes try to discuss it further and see if we can get, kind of a change in ruling on the approval. But in many cases, it doesn't work. It is what it is. They're going to say no, they won't approve that, and then perhaps send them off for further investigation, further assessments to have somebody else decide whether they need more treatment or not.
Now that's the insurance medical exam process.
Yes. Usually that's what that turns into. Yes.
Is that a bit pernicious or?
Yeah. Well, it's basically the insurer deciding that they either don't think or don't want to approve further funds, or maybe for some reason they are unable to do so unless they have more medical evidence on file that further treatment is required. And so then the client goes through that process of being referred to an independent evaluation. And then whatever comes from that assessment is usually what's followed through on. We're the ones who need to kind of broker the relationship between the insurer and the client from a healthcare perspective, from what we're offering, and to, facilitate the request for funding and, trying to get things approved and, kind of help move the whole process along. But then, of course, if we come to a dead end because our requests are being denied, then there's not much more we can do past that. It usually ends up going to a lawyer. And that's when we get lawyers get involved, and then they sort of take over the dealing with the insurance company and sort of managing the case from that perspective.
Leslie, please explain the rule regarding priority of payment, meaning that a person's workplace extended health insurance must be billed and exhausted first before the auto insurer is billed. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that is an insurer's rule here in Ontario that when somebody is in an auto accident and they make a claim through their auto insurance, that the priority of billing or insurance usage is that they are to submit their costs through to their private insurance, extended healthcare benefits first, and then second in line is the auto insurer. So whatever the extended healthcare insurance plan will not pay for, then can be billed to the auto insurer. And you have to do that until their private benefits have been exhausted. And then from there, the auto insurer will pay the remainder.
Do patients complain about this?
Oh yeah, sure. We hear about that. Yeah, quite a bit. And I don't blame them. Like, you've paid for and you have a benefit plan or a private insurance plan, and that you're being obligated to use that for an incident, which you have another set of insurance that you're also obligated to pay for and have and carry. And then they force you to exhaust the first line of insurance, which you might actually need for something not auto accident related at some other time. So a pre-existing issue or a brand new issue that you have yet to kind of come across. So it's, it's pretty frustrating. We feel that it's almost disrespectful actually to the to patients and clients that have forcing them to use their insurance. And it's also an administrative challenge on our end also. It introduces another whole layer of administration of an auto insurance claim. So when we get these people that have both forms of insurance and we have to administer through the extended healthcare plan first, we have to hold on to any billings that might go to the auto industry, which delays billing because the first line has to be billed through to their private insurer. We have to wait for payment to come in or, and that we have proof of payment because we have to supply that proof of payment to the auto insurer in order for them to release funds.
So you have to not only first bill the extended health for an auto accident, You have to then prove to the auto insurer that you've exhausted that billing, which drains the patient's account. And then only then are you able to actually get any funds from the auto insurer.
That's correct.
Now, look, it sounds like this system is stacked in favor of the auto insurance industry.
It sure sounds like it, and certainly, the lived experience is that it's very much like that. That they're very much, kind of in the driver's seat, and that it is stacked in favor. I mean, kind of notoriously, it sure appears that insurance companies in general don't really like to have to pay out. And when you do have to pay out, it affects premiums, and there's always a consequence. And of course, auto insurers in general, are good at making money. So, it's when you're dealing with it, on this sort of a scale, and kind of falling on providers to kind of administer and deal with these challenges, it sure seems like it's stacked in favor of the auto insurer for sure.
So what impact does all this administrative effort that you have to put in, how does that affect accounting costs?
Well, I mean, administrative costs are included in fees. We don't have a billing code or a billable amount for administrative costs. It's all part of the fee that we get. So, the costs from a business perspective of the money that comes in from a auto insurance claim, that money has to cover everything. Cost of the staff that work with the client, the cost of the administration that is being done on behalf of the case, and any of the other costs that comes with running business. So, my office manager, who is the person who does our auto insurance billing, probably that the auto insurance sector of the work that she does is probably at least 50% of what she does.
So administration cost of dealing with all that red tape counts against the $3,500 cap?
Well, yeah, exactly. I think there, like I said, we don't bill separately for administrative time. And the cost, so the things we do get paid for from an administrative perspective is filling in forms. So they do pay us. There is a billable fee for the filling in a form. So that part does get paid. Interestingly, though, that is part of the money. So it $70, for example, is what's paid for filling in an OCF 18. So when you're putting in on your list of what you're billing for, that goes in there, and then that gets, put into the, kind of into the pot, and that's what we get that covered by that, but it's part of the same money.
Leslie, overall, is the red tape involved with providing care to auto accident victims a burden to your business?
I would say yes. I mean, that's certainly one of the challenges of providing care in the auto industry sector is the amount of administrative work that comes with it, right? Whether it's filling in forms, or it's managing the invoicing process, or it's dealing with the insurance companies themselves, the insurers, and so yeah, there is a fair amount of it for sure, and it is a bit of a deterrent, which I would say why not all healthcare providers like us do auto insurance work, because there is costs associated significantly into providing that care.
What about your compensation under this system? Are health service providers being adequately compensated?
Mm-hmm. I would say that at this stage of the game, it's starting to fall behind. It has been some long time since there has been any increase in the approved fees. And that is another issue within the sector that is difficult at times, is that all providers, physios are one, but all are kind of pigeonholed into what is an allowable amount of billings. So we don't have control over that. We're not allowed to bill what we think we should be billing for the service. It's prescribed, and different services have different sort of approved billing amounts. So some providers will not provide service because they don't pay what's, listed as regular rates. And they can be quite difficult about it. So you're kind of pigeonholed into what's the approved rate, and that approved rate hasn't changed in a long time, decade maybe.
RegWatch has reviewed the regulations and statutes detailing the fees health service providers can bill for under the system, and they haven't been increased since 2014, almost a decade. So that is pigeonholed from like a decade ago.
Yes, yeah. And that's obviously taking into no consideration the changes in the costs of delivering the care. And that has definitely gone up in the last 10 years. And so, yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned that clients, patients are, they do okay if they're a round peg because it's a round hole a la the auto insurance industry. Sounds like to me that in some cases, health service providers are struggling with that same problem, square peg, round hole.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have to try to make what we do fit into the structure that we're being asked to work within. These things are all sort of points of frustration for sure, because it's sometimes hard to deliver what you feel is required from a care perspective. That if it doesn't fit into, okay, we've only got so many treatments to work with, right? We have to do a minimum in order to do the billing. But if we do more than that because you need it, then our cost per session goes down, our value revenue per session, right? So sometimes you really do get into that, especially back to the MIG, when we are looking at it's structured in blocks. So there are 3 blocks within the MIG, 4 weeks each, and each has got its own kind of value attached. And so you have expected minimum number of visits that you're expected to deliver in that block. But if you deliver more visits than that, the money doesn't change. So the value of each visit is what changes. So then you're kind of into that, okay, well, how do we balance, right? If we deliver a lot more, then our revenue per visit is significantly taking a hit. If we don't deliver that, then we're probably not giving what they need. So there's definitely a kind of a walk to try to navigate that.
Now that must be tough, trying to balance treatment and your own compensation, because you have a business to run.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And it is tough for sure. And these are the things that make running healthcare businesses difficult this time. Yeah.
Is there any hope that the fees you get paid to provide the service, is there any hope that might get increased?
Well, I guess we always hope, but I certainly haven't heard anything about that happening in currently, that there's been any discussions, or is there anything going on to see that that's happening. I haven't heard that. So at this point in time, I would say it doesn't look like it.
Isn't there anyone, say your associations out there fighting to have changes made?
Like I say, again, I'm not aware of anything like overly active at the moment in the auto insurance sector. It's a little bit different on the WSIB side, which I know this is not the main focus of our conversation, but that's sort of the parallel on the injured worker side. And so there's been quite a bit of work on the WSIB sort of realm to try and manage the problems with fees, because they were even worse. Like the example I can give is, when I first started working as a physiotherapist here in Ontario 20 something years ago, we were getting paid somewhere in the realm of about $18.24 or something for a WSIB case per session. And now, that many years later, on a strict, the fee for service rate is only up to about 27 and change. So it hasn't moved very much in that period of time. Now, WSIB again has developed different things to try to adjust for that. But it's very similar. They're very parallel to each other, auto insurance and WSIB, for the way things are kind of being structured. So there's been a lot more work on that side to try and get something better with respect to compensation than there has been in on the auto sector. There has been very little movement since they brought in the minor injury and the whole concept of the OCF 18 form and all those things. There hasn't been much change on the financial side.
When you look at everything that's happened, do you think that maybe there's a lack of respect that the auto insurance industry has for health service providers and what you do?
Well, I mean, if what you get paid is evidence of the amount of respect that's being given to you, then I would say yes. I mean, certainly healthcare providers are on the short end of the straw as far as, in the rehab industry anyways, from a healthcare perspective, as far as compensation is concerned and valuing of service. Yes, we're certainly on the short end of the stick for sure. Mm-hmm.
Have any practitioners decided to throw in the towel and stop providing treatment to patients under the auto insurance system?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say here in my community, I believe there is only 2 of us that are actively providing auto insurance care. Most are not, because of these reasons, right? It's timely, time consuming. It's costly from an administrative perspective. The revenue, I guess, is questionable given all of these things you have to be able to act on and deliver. For sure. And then, of course, there's costs associated with being regulated provider through the financial services regulatory. That's fairly new. And then the whole getting involved with HCI, there's a whole thing with that too. So many providers just don't do it.
So what needs to change in your mind to secure the foundation for providing this service, this critical healthcare service in Ontario for the future?
Well, I think the first thing that should happen is that people need to not have to use all of their other insurance before they can access their auto insurance. I think auto insurance should be a standalone, and if you have a legitimate auto accident related claim, that you should be able to access that insurance directly and not have it affect anything else. That's pretty easy to do and should not be held up from move that forwards. Beyond that, I think decreasing the amount of administrative load required, giving a little bit more control back to regulated healthcare providers who are, regulated for a reason to be able to provide medical opinion within our scopes, and to provide give advice and give recommendations around what somebody kind of needs to benefit from. That would certainly be a helpful thing to have a little bit more autonomy in how we provide the care that we see as being necessary. And then, of course, the third thing would be the financial side.
Raise your rates.
Exactly. Addressing the value that's tied to the work that we do. By paying, reasonable rates, competitive rates, going rates. I have a situation going on right now with the client of mine with a different provider, and that provider wants to bill regular rates, and the auto insurer is not approving it because they won't pay higher than a certain amount of money for the service. And so now we're sitting in a situation where the client can't get care. And so now we're trying to figure that one out, but all because the insurer will not approve the rates that the provider is requesting.